It was another beautiful day in paradise for Captain Barnabas Tate. The smell of the surf and gunpowder on the open sea. The sun shining down through crystal clear waters. Screams of men as they lay dying.
"Load grape shot. Smartly now, ye lubbers,"
the captain ordered. A relay carried his order to the gun deck, and men moved to load a second volley. His partner, Captain Sinclair, was a tad late to the action today. The Esmeralda was barely in range when they caught this unfortunate sloop in a crossfire. It looked like Sinclair was bringing his ship around to rake their quarry's bow. Captain Tate would hold back and pepper them at point-blank range. That would take the fight out of them. The plan was proceeding just as it had dozens of times before. It was a tidy setup. The two crews lay in wait on the eastern and western tips of the crescent-shaped Chican Atoll. To the north, the Horn of Haribul created a bottleneck, forcing all ships to pass by. Anyone sailing this far south would surely see a ship anchored in the center of this lagoon. Those possessing questionable morals or charitable concerns found themselves drawn to the ostensibly waylaid vessel. Once the baited ship boarded their decoy, the two schooners dropped their camouflage and set sail to intercept. With their guests' momentum lost and half the crew on an empty ship, there was no chance of escape once a ship passed into the maw of the atoll. 10 cannons on the Esmeralda rang out, splintering the sloop from bow to stern.
"Fire, and prepare to board,"
bellowed Captain Tate. The grape shot swept clean the scrambling deckhands of the beleaguered ship. The Fierce and the Esmeralda pinned the sloop between their starboard sides. The crew dropped gangplanks and met on the deck of the captured ship. The crews of the Fierce and Esmeralda ignored the surviving crew of the Proxima to exchange hearty greetings, having not seen their fellows in weeks. Captain Sinclair stood on the afterdeck of his ship, hands clasped behind his back. The perfunctory man was a formal Imperial officer. He liked to put on airs that he was still running a respectable vessel, but Tate had seen the debased things he'd done. Sinclair's background as a subordinate made him predictable, and that meant he was a safe choice to captain the second ship. Captain Sinclair would not deign to set foot on the captured ship. Captain Tate held no such reservations. There would be no one to parley with, as there would be no survivors of the Proxima. He would see to it personally that the provision of goods and execution of prisoners were handled appropriately. They couldn't very well have bodies floating around, getting sucked into a current, or survivors warning the steady stream of ships. They sealed the dead away below deck, along with the bound survivors, tied by their feet to the mast. They alternated towing the captured vessel to the southern side of the atoll and scuttling the ship. Today was Sinclair's turn to do the deed. Sometimes Captain Tate imagined that watery graveyard, each improvised tomb hiding a maypole of bloated corpses. It was necessary. If there were any loose ends, it would ruin the whole trick.
"So, what business do ye have with me ship?"
Captain Tate asked the prisoners, pointing up at the Undaunted, the brigantine he used as a decoy. The ship was much too large to crew with the numbers they had, but it was exotic and enticing to passers-by. "We saw the colors flying upside down. We were only trying to help," a man whimpered.
"Aye, and ye will help. Your stores will keep us going for months yet.
The crew erupted in mocking laughter. A voice called out from below deck.
Captain, they had a lady on board. She's been run through with a cannonball, though.
Captain Tate turned back to the prisoners.
Bad luck bringing a lady on board. We're basically blameless. Still, 'tis a shame she's dead. Would have really helped the boys pass the time.
One prisoner, an older fellow, spat in the captain's face.
Oh, what happened to all that kindness from before?
The captain grinned.
Get these scallywags below deck, and take what you can.
Captain Tate watched the spoils roll in with satisfaction. They almost had enough loot to call it quits. With nothing to do but eat, boredom was the greatest enemy in the area. All they had to do was stay sane and wait for the next mark. If supplies ran too low, they'd make for port, divvy up the treasure, and spend as long as possible drunk in some brothel. With the loot divided, the men said their farewells, and Esmeralda dragged off Proxima. Fierce returned to the western side of the atoll and reset the trap. Some 2 weeks later, Captain Tate was snoozing in the sun when his lookout raised an alarm.
A ship, Captain. Aye, it's coming up on us fast.
Captain Tate pulled out his telescope and saw another schooner approaching the Undaunted.
Avast, ye swabs! Trim the mainsail!
He called to his men. The crew on land hastily boarded the ship, and deckhands set to work. One man stood by the mizzenmast and pointed at their new target.
Captain, it has no sails. 'Tis a cursed ship that sails swiftly with it.
Flint locked, and a shot split the air. The man spun and fell on his face. Captain Tate lowered his smoking pistol. He nodded his head slowly.
It seems an ill fate befalls any who thinks that ship be cursed.
The frozen crew snapped back to action after catching his meaning, and the fierce joined the chase. They repeated the routine of barraging the mysterious ship, but couldn't see anyone moving on deck. Something was feeling off. Captain Tate reasoned the crew was below, and they had pulled in the oars they'd used to row into the lagoon. Esmeralda had the wind and was the first to snare their prey with grappling hooks. Facing no obvious opposition, they laid down gangplanks on their starboard side and boarded. Fierce came in range of throwing their own lines when the sailless ship lurched and slammed broadside into the Esmeralda. The two ships moved laterally against the waves and out into the ocean. They slowed to a stop amid a great creaking sound, as if the Esmeralda's port side had run aground. The hull of the crewless ship strained as its port side lifted out of the water. Screams of men and slimy appendages rose into the air. Smooth appendages, the width of a grown man's arm, enveloped the Esmeralda. The probing fevers sought terrified sailors, and upon grasping one, whipped up violently before shooting down into the sea. The cries of the men abruptly silenced as they passed into the deeps. Tendrils reaching through portholes forced the man they snatched back through the tiny opening, dragging whatever pulp remained into the brine below.
Hard to port! Hard to port! Make for shore!
Captain Tate hollered at his men. The fierce was a flurry of activity as everyone pushed themselves to work faster, all save for the captain, who continued to watch the horror unfold through his telescope. The mystery ship and Esmeralda were now fully suspended by a writhing mass of death. Beneath the waves, a gargantuan shadow slid into the lagoon. Another ship came into view, but it wasn't cresting the horizon. It was emerging from below. More and more masts broke the surface. Derelict, barnacle-riddled ships breached the water. A massive swell radiated from the two vessels as the tentacles released them with a splash. The death throes of their comrades had ceased. Far behind the wake of the fleeing fierce remained nothing but ships, stillness, and shadow. In unison, with impossible speed, all the bobbing vessels spun to bear down on the fierce. Esmeralda and even the anchored Undaunted joined the chase. The prows of the Forsaken fleet churned up a torrent of water as they surged towards the fierce. Captain Tate's orders came as shrill pleas. "Put your bleeding backs into it!" Despite their head start, tendrils slithered up and clung to the fierce's taffrails.
"We've been caught, Captain. What shall we do?"
His mate called. Captain Tate, with the eyes of every soul on board upon him, turned and ran for the bow. His boots thumped heavily on the deck, and he dove off the bowsprit.
Abandon ship!
He yelled in midair. The chill of the sea replaced the sounds of his panicked men. Tate's natural impulse was to swim for the surface, but was petrified when he saw their pursuer. It was a bright day, and the pristine waters of the lagoon did nothing to obscure the nightmare that dominated the ocean floor. Its body was that of a massive, shell-less sea turtle, complete with 4 flippers. Dozens of ships in various states of decay and submersion were attached to the thing. Longer, thicker tendrils extended from its back and looped through the hulls of the captured vessels. It toyed with the sunken flotilla, raising and sinking ships at whim. In place of a head, it had a large forward-facing beak, surrounded by hundreds of the smaller tendrils. It used these tentacles to pass along his flailing crew members and feed them into the rhythmically snapping beak with ruthless efficiency. His lungs burned, prompting him to tear his eyes away. He broke the surface, gulping in air. Irrationally, he felt more vulnerable now that he'd lost sight of the monster. Swimming like he never had before, his mind reeled at the thought of such a creature lurking beneath him. The handfuls of seawater he'd been desperately clawing back turned into sand. Tate clambered to his feet, laughing all the while. He was the happiest man ever marooned. His heart sank when he felt something wrap around his leg and was tugged off his feet. The pressure was incredible. He knew his leg would sooner come free before that powerful grip released. With a great jerk, it pulled the former captain under the waves like some infernal undertow. Streaming through the water, he couldn't help but appreciate the thoroughness. If there were any loose ends, it would ruin the whole trick.